June 17, 1994. 95 million Americans stopped everything they were doing. They weren't watching the NBA Finals. They weren't watching the World Cup. They were watching a white Ford Bronco crawl down a Los Angeles freeway at 35 miles per hour. Inside that vehicle sat a man who just days earlier had been one of America's most beloved celebrities. And by the end of that night, he would become the most famous murder suspect in history. This is the story of how a football hero became the center of the trial of the century. Before we dive in, if you're fascinated by true crime stories that shook the nation, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We cover the most gripping cases with the deep analysis you won't find anywhere else. Now, let's get into it. To understand how this case captured the world's attention, you need to understand who O.J. Simpson was before June 1994. Orenthal James Simpson wasn't just a football player, he was an icon. Born in San Francisco in 1947, Simpson overcame childhood poverty and a bout with rickets that left him bow-legged. He went on to become one of the greatest running backs in NFL history, the first player to rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season, a Heisman Trophy winner, a Hall of Famer. But his fame extended far beyond the football field. By 1994, O.J. had successfully transitioned into Hollywood. He appeared in the Naked Gun movies. He was the face of Hertz rental cars, sprinting through airports and commercials that became cultural touchstones. He was a sports commentator, a personality everyone seemed to know and love. He had everything: fame, fortune, respect from millions of Americans across racial lines, which was rare in the early 1990s. And he had recently divorced his second wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, June 12, 1994. Brentwood, Los Angeles. Nicole Brown, Simpson's mother, had left her glasses at the Mezzaluna restaurant earlier that evening. A waiter named Ronald Goldman volunteered to return them to Nicole's condominium on South Bundy Drive. It was a simple act of kindness that would cost him his life. Sometime around 10:15 p.m., a neighbor's dog began barking frantically. The dog, an Akita, was found wandering the neighborhood later that night with blood on its paws and legs. When a concerned neighbor followed the dog, it led him to 875 South Bundy Drive. What he found there would shock the nation. Nicole Brown Simpson lay in a pool of blood at the bottom of the steps leading to her home. Her throat had been slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. Ronald Goldman was found nearby, his body showing defensive wounds that indicated he had fought desperately for his life. Both victims had been stabbed multiple times in a brutal, frenzied attack. The scene was horrific. Blood was everywhere. The attack had been personal, violent, and savage. Within hours, detectives began looking at the most obvious suspect in any murder of a divorced woman, the ex-husband. And that's when O.J. Simpson's name entered the investigation. When police arrived at O.J. Simpson's Rockingham estate just after 5 a.m. on June 13th, they noticed something immediately suspicious. A white Ford Bronco was parked haphazardly on the street. There was blood on the door handle. Detective Mark Furman scaled the wall of the estate after no one answered the gate, claiming he was concerned for Simpson's safety. What they found inside seemed damning. A bloody glove behind the guest house. It matched the glove found at Nicole's crime scene. Blood drops leading from the Bronco into the house, a bloody sock in Simpson's bedroom. O.J. had left for Chicago on a red-eye flight the night of the murders. When detectives called him with news of Nicole's death, they noted his reaction seemed strange. He didn't ask how she died. He didn't ask who did it. When he returned to Los Angeles later that day, police noticed a cut on his left hand. Simpson claimed he had cut it breaking a glass in his Chicago hotel room when he learned of Nicole's death. But investigators were skeptical. The evidence seemed overwhelming. DNA testing, which was still relatively new in 1994, would later show that blood at both crime scenes matched Simpson's genetic profile. Blood in the Bronco matched both victims. The odds, experts would testify, were astronomical, billions to one. There were also the domestic violence reports. Nicole had called police multiple times during their marriage, reporting abuse. In 1989, O.J. had pleaded no contest to spousal battery. There were photographs of Nicole with bruises and a split lip. The prosecutors believed they had a slam dunk case, but they were about to learn that evidence alone doesn't win trials. Not when you're dealing with a beloved celebrity, racial tensions, and the best defense team money can buy. June 17, 1994. O.J. Simpson was supposed to turn himself into police at 11 a.m. Instead, he disappeared. His attorney, Robert Kardashian, read a rambling letter to the media that Simpson had left behind. It sounded like a suicide note, speaking of a great life and asking people to remember him differently. An arrest warrant was issued. An APB went out. The LAPD declared Simpson a fugitive. And then, around 6:20 p.m., a caller reported seeing Simpson in his white Ford Bronco on the 5 freeway. What happened next became one of the most surreal moments in American television history. Simpson's friend Al Cowlings was behind the wheel. Police received word that Simpson was in crisis and potentially armed. Officers followed at a distance, not wanting to escalate the situation. The vehicles moved slowly through Southern California, rarely exceeding 35 miles per hour. News helicopters captured every moment from above. NBC interrupted coverage of the NBA Finals. ABC broke away from the U.S. Open golf tournament. An estimated 95 million people watched as the white Bronco made its way down Southern California's freeways. People lined the overpasses holding signs supporting Simpson. Some cheered. The whole thing had a bizarre, almost festive atmosphere that seemed completely disconnected from the reality that 2 people had been brutally murdered just 5 days earlier. For nearly 2 hours, the nation watched. Simpson communicated with police negotiators by phone, expressing wishes to visit Nicole's grave and see his mother. Finally, the Bronco pulled into Simpson's Rockingham estate. After tense negotiations, Simpson surrendered. Police found a substantial amount of cash, disguise materials including facial hair, a weapon, and a passport in the vehicle. To prosecutors, it looked like a failed escape attempt. To many Americans watching, it looked like a man in the depths of despair. When O.J. Simpson's murder trial began in January 1995, it was already being called the trial of the century. The prosecution team was led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. They had what seemed like an overwhelming amount of evidence: DNA, blood, the gloves, a history of domestic violence, the suspicious behavior on the night of the murders, and the Bronco incident. But Simpson assembled what the media dubbed the Dream Team of defense attorneys. Robert Shapiro coordinated the defense. F. Lee Bailey, famous for defending high-profile clients, brought his courtroom experience. Alan Dershowitz, a Harvard law professor, handled appeals. Robert Kardashian, Simpson's longtime friend, provided support. And then there was Johnny Cochran. Cochran took over as the lead attorney and transformed the defense strategy. This wasn't just about reasonable doubt anymore. Cochran turned it into something much bigger: a trial about race, police misconduct, and systemic injustice in America. His strategy was brilliant and controversial. He would put the LAPD on trial, instead of defending Simpson's innocence directly. He would make the case about something larger than 2 murders. He would tap into deep-seated distrust of the police, especially among African Americans who remembered Rodney King's beating just 3 years earlier. The defense had another major advantage: money. Simpson's legal team cost an estimated $50,000 per day. They hired their own forensic experts. They investigated every piece of evidence. They turned the trial into a war of attrition. And they found their most powerful ammunition in an LAPD detective named Mark Fuhrman. The prosecution's case seemed airtight on paper, but it began to unravel in the courtroom. Their first major problem was the glove. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was a pair of expensive Arras leather light gloves, one found at the crime scene, one found at Simpson's estate. Both were soaked in blood, matching the victims and Simpson, in what many legal experts call one of the biggest mistakes in trial history. Prosecutor Christopher Darden asked Simpson to try on the gloves in front of the jury. Simpson stood up, walked to the jury box, and struggled to put on the gloves. They appeared too small. He grimaced and pulled, but the gloves wouldn't fit properly. Johnny Cochran saw his moment. In his closing argument, he delivered a line that became one of the most famous in legal history: "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The prosecution tried to explain that the gloves had shrunk from blood and moisture, that Simpson was wearing latex gloves underneath, that he was deliberately making it harder to put them on, but the damage was done. The jury had seen with their own eyes that the gloves didn't fit, but the defense's most powerful weapon wasn't the gloves. It was Detective Mark Fuhrman. Fuhrman was the detective who had found the bloody glove at Simpson's estate. He testified that he had never used racial slurs and wasn't racist. The defense obtained recordings that proved otherwise. Laura Hart McKinney, a screenwriter, had taped interviews with Fuhrman for a screenplay about police. On those tapes, Fuhrman used the N-word dozens of times. He boasted about planting evidence. He described violence against suspects. He revealed deep-seated racism and misconduct. When Fuhrman was recalled to the stand and asked if he had planted evidence in the Simpson case, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Johnny Cochran had his verdict-winning argument. If Fuhrman would lie about racism, what else would he lie about? If he had planted evidence in other cases, why not this one? The prosecution's case, built on forensic evidence collected by the LAPD, became tainted by association with a detective who had been exposed as a racist liar. For 134 days, the trial dominated American media. Court TV broadcast every moment. Millions of Americans followed along daily. The case became water-cooler conversation across the country. But as the trial progressed, something troubling became clear. America was watching two completely different trials. Polls showed that opinions about Simpson's guilt split largely along racial lines. Most white Americans believed he was guilty. Most black Americans believed he was innocent, or, at minimum, that the LAPD had mishandled or planted evidence. This wasn't just about O.J. Simpson anymore. It had become a proxy for larger issues of race, justice, and police misconduct in America. For many African Americans, the trial represented decades of systemic racism and police abuse. The LAPD had a long history of racial profiling and violence against black communities. The Rodney King beating was still fresh in everyone's memory. The fact that those officers had been acquitted despite videotape evidence had sparked the 1992 Los Angeles riots just 2 years earlier. In this context, the defense's argument that evidence might have been planted or manipulated by racist cops didn't seem far-fetched. It seemed entirely plausible. For many white Americans, particularly the victims' families, this framing was a grotesque distortion of justice. Two people had been brutally murdered. There was overwhelming physical evidence, and the defense was making it about everything except whether Simpson had committed the crimes. The trial had become a Rorschach test. What you saw depended on your own experiences with the American justice system. October 3rd, 1995. After more than 8 months of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. That speed alone sent a clear message about what was coming. At 10 a.m. Pacific Time, an estimated 150 million people stopped what they were doing to watch the verdict announcement. Trading on the New York Stock Exchange slowed to almost nothing. Long-distance phone calls dropped dramatically. It was the most watched event in American television history up to that point. Judge Lance Ito's courtroom was packed. Camera operators adjusted their equipment. O.J. Simpson stood between Johnny Cochran and Robert Shapiro. The clerk read the verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder. Not guilty on both counts. Simpson's reaction was a slight smile and nod. His family erupted in celebration. Robert Kardashian's face showed shock and disbelief. In the gallery, Nicole Brown Simpson's family sat stunned. Fred Goldman, Ronald Goldman's father, shook his head in disgust. Outside the courtroom and across America, reactions split along familiar lines. At predominantly black institutions and gatherings, there was cheering and celebration. Many saw it as a rare victory against a system that had historically failed them. In many white communities and among legal experts, there was shock and anger. To them, a guilty man had walked free because of racial politics and celebrity status. The Goldman and Brown families held a press conference. Their grief and anger were palpable. Fred Goldman spoke emotionally about what he saw as a failure of justice. But according to the law, O.J. Simpson was innocent. The jury had spoken. Or had they? The criminal trial acquitted Simpson, but the families of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson weren't finished. In 1997, they filed a civil lawsuit against Simpson for wrongful death. The burden of proof in civil court is lower than criminal court, preponderance of evidence rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. This time, the outcome was different. On February 4th, 1997, a predominantly white jury found Simpson liable for the wrongful deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. They awarded $33.5 million in damages to the victims' families. Simpson has never paid most of that judgment. He moved to Florida, where homestead laws protect his residents from seizure. He spent decades fighting payment, and the families have recovered only a fraction of what they're owed. Simpson's life after the trial became increasingly troubled. His reputation never recovered. Endorsement deals vanished. His acting career was over. He became a pariah in mainstream American culture, though he still had supporters who believed he had been framed. In 2006, he even attempted to publish a book titled If I Did It, a hypothetical confession about how he would have committed the murders if he had done them. Public outrage forced the cancellation, but the Goldman family later won rights to the book and published it with the subtitle Confessions of the Killer, with "if" shrunk to near invisibility on the cover. Then, in 2007, Simpson's life took another dark turn. He was arrested in Las Vegas for armed robbery and kidnapping, related to sports memorabilia he claimed belonged to him. In 2008, he was convicted and sentenced to 33 years in prison, though he was released on parole in 2017 after serving 9 years. Many people saw the conviction as justice finally catching up with Simpson, even if it was for an entirely different crime. The O.J. Simpson case remains one of the most controversial and discussed trials in American history. So, what really happened on June 12, 1994? The physical evidence pointed overwhelmingly towards Simpson's guilt. The DNA evidence, even accounting for the collection issues the defense highlighted, was extraordinarily strong. The blood evidence, the gloves, the timeline, the history of domestic violence, the behavior after the murders, all of it created a compelling narrative of guilt. But the defense successfully created reasonable doubt by exposing real problems with the investigation. The LAPD did make mistakes. Evidence was collected improperly. Detective Furman was proven to be a racist who had lied under oath. The possibility of contamination or even planting of evidence, while unlikely, couldn't be completely ruled out. The jury had to decide, beyond a reasonable doubt, based on evidence collected by a police department with credibility problems, was Simpson guilty? They said no. But perhaps the most important legacy of the O.J. Simpson case isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about what the trial revealed about America itself. It exposed the deep racial divides in how Americans view the justice system. It showed how celebrity and wealth can dramatically alter legal outcomes. It demonstrated the power of television to transform a trial into entertainment. It revealed the complex intersections of race, class, fame, and justice in America. The case changed how we think about domestic violence, making it part of the national conversation in ways it hadn't been before. It popularized DNA evidence and forensic science in criminal cases. It made court TV must-watch television and launched the modern true crime obsession. 2 people lost their lives in a brutal attack on June 12, 1994. Their families have never received the justice they believe they deserved. And O.J. Simpson, once one of America's most beloved figures, spent the rest of his life shadowed by the accusations he was acquitted of. The trial of the century is over, but the questions it raised about justice, race, and fame in America remain as relevant today as they were in 1995. What do you think? Was justice served in the O.J. Simpson case? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into one of America's most controversial trials compelling, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. We cover the cases that defined history and continue to spark debate decades later. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.